both shots and also COVID, so
Yep, and I too.
I'm pretty safe, but
Okay.
you never know.
Well, I'm going to start out with a little quick introduction.
Okay.
And do you go by Jim or James?
Either one.
Okay.
Jim usually. James.
Okay. We would like to welcome let's start this again. We would like to welcome Jim Peters, who has graciously agreed to talk with us about the history of Bellaire. This project, A Living History of Bellaire, is sponsored by Bellaire Public Library and funded by a grant for Next Level Leadership, University of Michigan. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, good. So, what is your experience with Bellaire? How long have you lived here?
I don't live in Bellaire. I live in Mansalona.
Okay.
I started working here in March of 1968.
Okay.
And I retired in 96.
Did you work in the county building?
I worked in the old courthouse at first.
Okay.
Upstairs the first year, then they moved us to the basement. And then they moved us into a temporary building. When I first came, Helen Smith was the county director. And she did a lot of neat things back in, even some before I got here. She had a migrant worker. In fact, she had 2 migrant workers that worked only temporary in the summer. And back at that time, the county was responsible for their own welfare programs. There was no federal or state money involved, so they could pretty much make their own rules. And one of the things that she did, and I wasn't here when she did it, but somewhere in the 50s, she put a note in the newspaper that anybody on welfare who smoked store-bought cigarettes, went to a bar, did not grow a garden, or can food over the summer, would not be eligible for any benefits later on in the year. So, and the argument was, well, what do we charge? She told them that she would get them jars, and if they didn't have enough property, they could do it at the county poor farm, that they would have to be responsible for that. And the argument was upheld in the courts that she could do that because it was county money and she was in charge of it. And then the wire services picked it up, and I think I told you that if you could get an old issue of the Detroit Times, you could see that. And the funny part was that 10 years later, 20 years later, after even, some of these same people were still on welfare. So a lot of the program didn't work. The other side of it, and I didn't say this to you earlier, but the foster care program here had some real tragedies. One of the foster homes here in Bellaire, the guy went to jail for molesting the kids. Happened once in Mansalona. There was a girl killed in a foster home. But at the same time, on the plus side, Lyle McFerrin and his wife had teenagers who came out beautifully. They had no problems at all. Myrtle Langham had a foster home for boys, delinquent boys, and I know several of them who went through her home that are very successful. Everett Ash here in town raised some real good kids for the in taking over for their parents. And Joe Bargy over in Elk Rapids. Some of these people, they all did a great job. Mary Shoeboy was wonderful with babies. And that was the hardest placement we had, was to place babies because they were always given up for adoption and they needed a temporary home. And it's very difficult for a mother, even a father, to give up a baby after they've had it for 6-8 weeks. But Mary and Jerry Shoeboy both did beautiful jobs with those kids. So there was a lot of real good pluses there. And it's kind of, interesting. Antrim County had a strange history for welfare in that in the beginning, the first welfare worker was on the Social Services Board. I believe he was the chairman of it. And he hired his boss. the county director. So he was his boss's boss, that was written up in a book done by WPA way back in the 30s. Not so long ago, I guess. But anyway, Central Michigan University sponsored it, and the book I think was "We Are People" or "We Are the People" or something in that area. It would be a real interesting book if you could find it on the
I put some feelers out.
And,
I did put some feelers out.
It would be fun, but they hired me to be a food stamp worker.
Oh, okay.
Because that's what I did in Detroit before I moved up here. But they didn't have food stamps. So I got to do all the overload stuff.
Oh, okay.
And so I would help out Burl Smith. When I first came, Burl was the child welfare worker.
Okay.
So I'd help him out, and I did some licensing for daycare and foster homes. And Don Stoops was the EDC worker, so I did some of his stuff. And the general assistance, Don was also that. And I did that. And then I did old age. Anna Jager was the old age assistance worker.
Oh, okay.
I helped her out. She was a school teacher at one time. And then she went to work for the welfare department. All real good people. And then when the supervisor position opened up here, Burl was now county director. He told me that if I'd go back to school, I had 4 years of college, but if I go back to school and get a degree in social work, I could get promoted. So I went back to Ferris for a couple of years and got a degree. While I was still working, I'd go evenings. So that was kind of a rough period, but we, wife and I worked through it, and it's, it was good, and I had a lot of good experience working here. Some rough ones too, a couple times.
I bet.
But I brought some old postcards.
That's what you said.
Burl and I were cleaning out files, and at that time I was collecting stamps.
Oh, okay.
So I said, "Can I have some of the stamps?" And he said, "Well, you could if you make sure the names aren't visible, except, the client's name. The workers' names on some of those are still there."
Right.
And I left that because, they're public record.
Right.
And so it wouldn't hurt. And they might make, interesting.
Reading. Well, it's because back then this is the only way you were communicating.
Well, yeah, and we didn't have the computers. It was funny. Helen Smith, when I came here, told me that you were on call all the time, and you had to put your name in the phone book. But a lot of clients lived in Mansalona or Elk Rapids or whatever, and it's a long distance call to Bellaire at those days.
Wow.
So they would call my house and leave messages for me during the day, and sometimes in the evening. And my wife used to always say, "One of your girlfriends called," as a kind of
a joke.
But one day I stopped to talk to a friend in the store, and the kids were with me, and they said, "Daddy, is that one of your girlfriends?" I said, "Whoa, you gotta stop doing this, kid."
You think I have real girlfriends?
Yeah. But, I did get called out to first Christmas Eve I was here. I had to place a 9-year-old in foster care. She had been molested by her father. And Lyle and Gloria McFerrin took her in and made Christmas for her and everything. But it kind of shortened our Christmas because I had to get a court order and a doctor's exam and all of that kind of good stuff. And then I couldn't say anything to people, and they were wondering why in the world I would pull this girl away from her parents on Christmas Eve. But I really didn't have a whole lot of options at that point. But
so did you see a lot of abuse cases like that?
Not so many that you would. A lot of times the abuse was not really abuse. We'd get a call, and we had to respond within 24 hours. So I had one call from Elk Rapids one time where the boy had gone to school and with bruises on his back and everything. And he said that his father had done this. But as it turned out, he was angry with his father about some kind of a boots that his father wanted him to wear, and he didn't. So he beat himself up, and then he told the principal at school that his father had done it. So, you know, I mean, but there were a lot of times too. Harry Cook was the probate judge, and I had a call on a family living in a shack with no running water and no, in fact, there was dirt floors in the house, and it was really a bad living situation. And so I talked to the court about it, and Harry said, no, you can't do a neglect on this situation because you haven't helped them straighten out their problem. If they won't take help, or if you can't give them, you know, then we'll look at it as neglect. But until you've done everything you can to help them, we're not going to, we're not going to say it's neglect. So there was that. There were a lot of, families who lived hard. There was the Indians had a real hard time. I don't know if that's the right thing to say right now, but that's how we refer to them. Mm-hmm. They had a place called the Grove over in Keewaydin. It was kind of behind the Methodist church, and a lot of them lived in tar paper shacks and so on. And until they started, they really got a lot out of it with their working with the casinos and the bingo. Bingo was the thing that really got them going. But a lot of the people who lived there moved to Shabbytown, and they had money, and they fixed up most of those places that they were living over in Kuwait. It's been a long time since I was over that way, so I can't tell you what it's like now. But at that time, they lived pretty hard, and we'd get calls and say, such and such is bad, or this, But a lot of times, it was just, they didn't have what they needed, and it was partly our responsibility to see if we could help them. So a lot of the calls you'd get for child neglect were
checking
wellness in and making sure that if they weren't getting help, to let them know that it was available.
Now, were you involved? Did your department get involved?
So, how long? When did you retire from the?
In '96.
Okay. Well, you did it into the '90s. Wow.
Yeah, I worked I started in '61 in Detroit.
Okay.
I was going to be a lab technician, and they hired me as a lab technician, but they didn't have an opening, and they needed people desperately in the welfare department.
Okay.
So they sent me there. And I found, after I was there, I did surplus food, and then in July they switched to food stamps. And at that point, I said, I'm working here as a lab tech, but I could get 50 cents an hour more if I was a welfare worker. So I put in for a welfare worker, and I got to be one. And they said, well, yeah, but now that you're a welfare worker, you can't do food stamps. You got to go and do welfare. So they sent me to a general assistant's office, and I worked out of that for a 3 years, and then I went to work for ADC, because that's when the federal government came in and they merged all the county departments, and Detroit had its own welfare department, and they merged us all to the state. So they sent me to ADC, and I worked there for a year or so, and then I went to food stamps. So and that's where I was before I came here.
And why did you come north?
Well, we were renting a house in Detroit, and the landlord told us you can either buy the house or plan to move, because I'm selling it, and the new owners will probably want to live in it or do something else with it. So I had a friend in personnel, and I said, I'd like a job anywhere north of Bay City, but in the Lower Peninsula. The wife was born in Alpena, and I was born in Posen, so we have family over that way. And so I said, go. So he said, there's an opening in Antrim County for a food stamp worker. And I said, well, that's great because, that's my expertise right now. So I came up here and Helen Smith hired me to be the food stamp worker. And like I said, they didn't have food stamps, but it was my benefit because I learned all the programs real quick, and it was, it was a good. In fact, the first case I did here was kind of a tragedy. I had to make arrangements for a funeral for 5 people in the same casket. They were burned in a house fire, and so it was kind of a rough situation at that point. But that was,
That was your job.
1968.
Yep. Yep. So, did you ever work? So, when you were still here in the late '90s, were they doing food stamps like they do now with the credit card?
Yeah, they still did food stamps.
They still did food stamps.
Yeah, they used to have to buy them initially.
Oh.
And then they changed it to where they would just get a different amount based on
Number of people and what their income level was.
In fact, it was kind of funny because back when I was working for the city of Detroit, part of my welfare area was what they called the Black Bottom. And it was pretty much ghetto area. I mean, it was really, poor housing and people having a lot of financial problems and stuff. And I wrote a book, I never did anything with it, but saying build a big wall and put all these welfare people inside the wall and throw food packages over the top. But it didn't go that far. What I said was they would have a credit card, and they would be inside this area. There'd be a commissary. They would take the credit card to the store and get what they needed from that. And
that's what they ended up doing.
Well, it's not really there's no physical wall, but you still see, a segregation of people who don't have and, who are living hard. So.
Well, and now I think that, now it's, they actually do have like a credit card. And so anybody watching someone who gets food stamps, you couldn't tell that it was food stamps, or they're just using their debit card to pay for groceries. So for people who really need it, it's hard.
It's a little easier years ago when they had the food stamps, the actual paper, like money. There was a lot of cheating going on with that.
Oh, okay.
In fact, I did some undercover work with the Department of Agriculture, shopping with food stamps, trying to buy stuff that you weren't supposed to. And it's amazing how many people would cheat up to a point. I never found a store, they did have some, that would buy the stamps. And the price was $7 for a $10 book. They would buy or sell me groceries that I wasn't supposed to have. And most of the time they didn't discount it. One store did, he'd take a 10%
cut
ride on it. If I bought it $10 worth, I'd have to give him 11 or $9, he'd, 10. But that was the worst that I encountered.
Right.
Most of the stores I went to wouldn't,
cheat
and I'd go in without ID. They were supposed to check for an ID card. That was just a slap on the wrist. If they caught them cheating big time, they would take away their right to have food stamps. And that would cost, especially in the city, that would cost them big time because they'd lose half their business or more. So it was...
there was incentive to not cheat.
Yeah. And, like I said, I worked with, like I said, in Detroit, I couldn't shop. I acted as a witness.
Oh.
But you went in with no identification and no money. You had to leave all your money with the agent, and you'd take just food stamps, so that they couldn't say, well, he paid me in cash,
Right.
So I'd make sure your pockets were empty. It was a little exciting, and
Yeah.
of course I was young and foolish then. I only had one death threat from that.
Oh, no, yeah, I imagine there was some that, like you said, lost a lot of
Yeah.
money.
Well, and the guy copped a plea at the end anyway. He told, if you come to court and testify, I'm going to kill you. But then, before it got to court, he changed his plea to guilty and took his punishment, whatever it was.
Yeah. Yeah. So did you feel like you were understaffed even back then?
Oh, it was funny. It was always that way. And I told him one time, if you give me one more worker, I can cut the welfare caseload in half. Because we didn't have time to make home calls. You didn't have time to do a lot of the checkup behind people. And they took one worker away.
Yeah, that seems to be the complaint even today. That the caseloads are so that kids slip through the cracks and families slip through the cracks, but it sounds like it's always been that way. It just,
Our youngest daughter worked in Detroit, and she did home help for people. She worked for the state, and she'd go out and evaluate the house and what kind of help you need. And she was supposed to see these people every month. She had 300 cases. Now, there is no way you can do, if you work the full 160 hours a month, you don't take any time off, vacation, or sick leave or anything else, that leaves you with less than a half hour per client, and you have to travel from one house to the other.
Right.
And there's just no way that you could cover that.
Physically do that, yeah.
She missed one woman 3 months. She didn't see her. And she went to the house, knocked on the door, and the neighbor said, she's not there. And Patricia said, well, where is she? Well, she's dead. That guy that you're paying to take care of her killed her.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And he's still getting paid because nobody stopped the checks. So he's in jail now for killing this woman and being paid for taking care of her because they never got their money back.
Yeah. Yeah, but I know. That's too bad. Was there anything else that you want to share with us about the area? Or that's very interesting.
Well, I told you about Fred.
Right.
And he probably can tell it better than I can, but he may not because he's not one to blow his own horn.
I know.
But he hired, I think it was John Lamb. I'm not quite sure of Lamb's first name, but I think it was John. And Ben Powell Jr., who were both real good with computers. Ben Powell's father had the propane oil company here, and he worked for them. And this Lamb, I don't know what he did other than trying to contact aliens. He lived out by Central Lake, and he had all kinds of computer equipment and antennas and things all set up, and he was trying to contact people in outer space. And
so those kinds of aliens, I thought you meant immigrants.
No.
Okay.
And so he was doing that, but he, like I said, he was real good. Both of these guys were real good with computers. And we hired Judy Barnes, who was a low-level, the lowest level state worker you could be. I think it was PSE 1 was her class. But she was really good with people. Not good with math. So I asked Fred, we had a grant for doing home heat, and I asked Fred, I said, there's got to be some way to help her with doing the math. So he got a $2,500 Radio Shack computer, which back in that time was low price because, it was just a small outfit. And he and these two guys did a program for this home heating. And it was a simple program because it just looked at the person's income and how much their heat bill cost them last year. And then they would give them X number of dollars for whatever fuel they used. The checks were made out to the fuel company, so there was no way to just spend them. That was, but it was a good program, and it worked real well. And I said to Fred, with just a little bit of a twitch, you could do food stamps the same way. So he said, yeah, we probably could. So he again went, and they did food stamps. So then I pushed him to do ADC and Medicaid, and pretty soon he had all the programs on. And Charlevoix heard about it, and they wanted the program, so he shared it with them. And he shared it with Grand Traverse County. and the state said you can't do that.